Yuta and the Gridman Alliance channel the energy of the superhuman samurai cyber squad as they do battle with a massive kaiju who's hell-bent on destroying an entire city and wiping out people's memories. Things go full samurai in this episode of Gridman, another super exciting episode of the series which is giving us some pretty big revelations, such as who it is who's actually creating these monsters. And it might not be much of a shock, but spoiler warning, the one who's actually creating all of these kaiju beasts is none other than Yuta's classmate, Akane. Yes, the one who is quite smitten with him. One of my commenters actually mentioned this in the last review, and I actually didn't want to believe it at first, if only for the fact that when we see Akane in school, she's not wearing glasses, but when she returns home, she practically transforms into an entirely different character. She actually lives in this very cramped room, which is filled with all of these garbage bags and all of these toys and models of giant kaiju, and this is where she actually creates these things out of clay, and she's joined with this other cyberspace villain who goes by the name of Alexis, who has the power to use his instance ab reaction to transform these clay models into giant living kaiju, which destroy everything in their wake. Now, what is Akane's goal at the end of the day? Well, basically it just turns out that she's a little vindictive bastard. Her entire plan is basically just to get revenge on people that piss her off. Maybe that's the reason why those girls on the volleyball team were actively attacked by this kaiju, and it makes perfect sense as they were the ones that actually ruined the lunch that she was trying to give to Yuta. So she got really pissed off and decided to attack them with a giant goofy kaiju monster. And that's actually the plot of this episode as well, where she accidentally runs into her homeroom teacher who bumps into her, causing her to spill her drink. And this is going to piss her off enough to the point where she's going to create a giant monster to hunt this guy down and kill him. That's pretty much her entire motivation. I have to say that while it is interesting, it's also not as grandiose as that I actually imagined it in my mind. It's basically just a really angsty teenage girl who's solving all of her problems by sicking her giant attack dog kaiju on them. That alone is kind of interesting, but I'm wondering where Alexis goes into all of this. Alexis is kind of like an evil version of Gridman who lives within a computer, and it's clear that there's something of a weird backstory and something that's going on in this cyberspace that we don't know anything about. And believe it or not, it might even involve alien samurai. Another great character that they introduce in this episode is that really haggard guy from the very first episode, and his name is Samurai Caliber. He may or may not be human. It's kind of hard to say. While he does look human, he seems to lack a lot of very strange social skills, but his overall character is there to actually help out the Gridman Alliance, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that he himself is a samurai and can impart these abilities to Gridman. Just like Yuta, he can actually go inside of Junk the computer, and he actually transforms not into a giant superhero, but a giant destructive blade which is used to destroy kaiju, and it's used to great effect in this episode. I have to say that the action in this one was a lot better than the first episode, if only for the fact that we did get a slightly longer battle. That and the fact that Gridman has officially been optimized by Samurai Caliber. When he actually appears for the very first time, it's probably one of the most memorable scenes of the episode, as like I said, he is human, but he still seems kind of like he's an alien inside of a human body and not quite knowing what it means to actually be a human. He tries to walk through the door, but his swords just keep getting caught in the doorway and he ends up busting ass. This leads to a lot of really awkward reactions from the Gridman Alliance, but I have to say, him being introduced in the series is really cool because in the real world, he actually does have the abilities to be just sort of a superpowered samurai, even saving Yuta and his friends from all of this debris that's about to fall on top of them when this giant kaiju monster starts to attack. But the fact that he can go into the cyberspace and actually give Gridman some brand new upgrades and powers is awesome, and he even, like I said, optimizes Gridman and makes him a little more powerful, gives him a brand new look, making him look a lot more reminiscent of the character from Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad. I love that the show is actually embracing not only the original Japanese show, but even the one that was popular here in the United States of America. It's amazing that they could take something so obscure and esoteric and manage to make it awesome all these years later, in an anime form no less. But yeah, this episode is again very simple, just dealing with the aftermath of the kaiju attack, seeing that not only has everything been restored that was destroyed, but people who are killed don't seem to return, and they ultimately just sort of disappear, and people lose their memories of them, and brand new ones are actually implanted in their head. Like some of these girls on the volleyball team, it's implied that the parents think that they actually died during middle school, and it has nothing to do with some sort of weird giant attack. So while they can reverse the effects of the destruction of the city, if someone gets killed by one of these giant beasts, it looks like that's it for them, and you're going to lose all memories of them. This adds a nice dark element to the series, and it's really balanced well with a lot of the humor and over-the-top tokusatsu action that the Gridman and Ultra series is all about. Speaking of which, I love that the character of Sho is such a big fan of Ultraman. He brings it up multiple times to the point where he almost can guess exactly what's going to be happening in almost every single episode, whether it be the arrival of aliens or kaiju or what have you. And the actual kaiju that's in this episode is also just really cool looking, a very sort of weird, freaky looking version of Godzilla, except that I love the design of its face, which seems to be like a giant bubble, which is housing these two eyes, and it has the ability to shoot a giant beam from its chest, which it uses as almost like a laser to cut through the buildings like a hot knife through butter. Watching it sort of walk around the city also made me realize that I love that the series has captured the feeling of these creatures looking like they're actual men in monster rubber suits, the way that they actually move around and react, but the super clean animation and the destruction of the city with debris flying all over the place makes it one hell of a spectacle. And when optimized Gridman finally does appear in this episode, jumping, flipping around, kicking, firing beams, it's just all sorts of satisfying in that awesome anime, and especially that Studio Trigger way. This episode was great as all of the characters realize that they're now going to be involved in this crazy event to save the world from all of these monsters. They now all have the ability to communicate and see Gridman, and if the intro is any indication, we're going to be seeing a number of other allies just like Samurai Caliber who are going to be able to upgrade Gridman and give him all sorts of awesome powers. So what's the rundown on this episode of Gridman? I loved this one just as much as the first, maybe even more now. It is kind of shocking that Akane is the one who's actually creating all of these things, but there certainly was a lot of evidence to it in the first episode. But again, I didn't want to fully believe it as she didn't have glasses. I almost thought that it was going to end up being the homeroom teacher at first, especially the way they sort of built him up to be this, like, really just, like, I don't give a shit type of person throughout the course of the entire episode. He might be the most unenthused teacher that I've ever seen, but he actually ended up being the catalyst for Akane's revenge in this episode. As for why she's teamed up with this evil cyberspace villain, it's all a complete and utter mystery, but I'm sure all of this is ultimately going to be tied to the arrival of these alien samurai type characters and the fact that Yuta doesn't seem to have all of his memories back. There's actually a really good plot behind all of the ridiculousness and giant superheroes fighting against Godzilla monsters. It's amazing that they can actually balance that and manage to make it actually work without seeming too overly cheesy, but there's still certainly a layer of that delicious anime cheese, which makes this just a really fun show to watch. Really, the highlight of this episode is that amazing action scene at the end of the episode, and of course the introduction of Samurai Caliber, who's an instantly fun character for not having that much personality, but for just being incredibly quirky. They also managed to bring up the character of Rika just a little bit more, who of the three main characters easily I think has had the most character development. A lot of that doing with the fact that she's reluctant and that she has to join all of these weirdos, but she knows it's something that she's going to have to do if she actually wants to preserve the friendship and memories of her friends, knowing that if they actually do die in one of these giant kaiju confrontations, not only would they disappear, but she would lose all memories of them entirely. And honestly, when you really think about it, that's a pretty horrifying prospect. But it's propped up against a lot of ridiculousness of watching superheroes fight against giant monsters, so like I said, it's actually very well balanced in the way that it's actually playing out here. Really, what more can I say? This is a really fantastic readaptation of a classic tokusatsu series, and something that I think fans of the original Japanese version of Gridman, and even those who like Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, definitely need to check out. I really do think that Studio Trigger absolutely excels at making, like, giant robot-style battles or kaiju and tokusatsu stuff, and I think this is finally their opportunity to really show that off. It's not the most inventive show in the world, but as far as production value goes and character and action, it's a really solid and super fun experience, and I absolutely loved this episode, which is why I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. You guys need to check it out, and if any of you did watch the episode, tell me what you thought about it in the comment section below, and what you hope to see from the rest of Quad S Gridman. There it is, my friends. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay down, baby.